So I can actually start right now. This is,
I would say less than, yeah, let me see here, I'm just gonna try it.
In three. Oh, sorry.
Almost a little buffer.
Somebody's here.
Less than anyone.
this is Paul Schock with the Restoration Community Church and SCIPP program, and today is our forum dealing with child behavior, wellness, and also autism, along with Down syndrome and all different types of effects as far as kids with disabilities. And today, one of my guests is?
My name is Jessica Albrecht.
Jessica, could you actually tell us a little bit about your own experience dealing with children with disabilities?
I have quite a bit. I'm actually a special ed teacher. I work at a school for the severely disabled. Also, my son is autistic. He has level 3, which is severe autism. He's 5. He's about to be 6. And then also, my cousin has Down syndrome, and she's 2 years younger than me. And I used to take care of her growing up, too.
And can you tell me about your experiencing working with your own child along with your sister, and also just more or less the experience of people's interaction in the public?
In public, as far as how they are, how they act, or how other people are with them.
Anyway.
Anyway, okay. So for my son, he's still young. He doesn't really like crowds, loud noises, but we still take him. We take him to the store and stuff, and he gets a little overwhelmed with the lights. But he will sit there and watch them, and then walk down the hallways and watch the lights. Most of the time, I haven't noticed. I guess I just don't pay attention, but I haven't really noticed others say anything about him. I know I took him to the doctor once, and we were waiting in the waiting room, and people were looking at him. He kept going. He goes up to people. He just doesn't know a stranger, so he just goes up to people and he'll start like leaning on them and stuff. And I'm like, he's, I just say he's autistic, because to me it's not that big of a deal. And some people are like, you shouldn't have to tell them. But I'm like, it doesn't bother me. It's awareness. That's what we're doing, is bringing awareness to the fact that there are people out there that are different. So I haven't had any bad experiences, but I've heard bad experiences. So other than that, it's not a lot different, I guess, as of right now, because he's so young.
That's great. I would say, one of my experiences that I've actually always had growing up, I went on from elementary school to middle school, and right at my middle school I was actually sort of struggling a little bit, and right away the teachers didn't know how to deal with things. I was actually asking too many questions at the time and trying to figure things out, so they ended up trying to figure out what's going on and put me through all this testing. And it was actually one of the best school districts in Illinois, in northern Illinois. And so I went on to all this testing. They didn't really figure out anything. They had a sense that I might have been dyslexic in a certain way. And so I ended up having to, it seemed like everything was warped because I was transformed from a routine to having to go backwards. I was put in a class with individuals that were actually disabled, kids that were actually autistic, Down syndrome, to kids that were mentally disabled, and so it was almost like a tossed salad. And during that time, and it was always daunting in the sense that it seemed like the teachers that they actually had in that class didn't really know how to actually teach each individual student of their needs. They were somewhat overwhelmed which is understandable at times with the budgets that some of the states provide for special education and everything. And the hard thing was that I found is that a lot of the stuff that they were teaching was pretty much stuff that you would actually be learning maybe 4 or 5 grades before that you already knew, but they didn't have the ability to go on your pace too. So you were actually having to pretty much go backwards. Luckily, I was able to take a couple classes on the mainstream during that time. But it was always frustrating because you actually had your other classmates not knowing that you were used to, not knowing what's going on and how to react with you and everything. And then you're in a classroom with individuals with other disabilities you don't know how to deal with too yourself. So I'm sure yourself being in special ed that working with a lot of the kids, it's actually not easy for those kids to actually interact with the public as far as regular classes and the interaction with other students at times.
Yeah, so I actually work in what they call a separate public school. So they are not in the general education at all. But these kids, though, it's not just one diagnosis. A lot of them have autism, severe autism, but they also have other diagnoses to go with it, maybe PTSD, cerebral palsy, all kinds of things. And the majority of them are nonverbal. So they don't, I would say none of them, in my class at least, have been in general ed. One of them was in Head Start. He went to Head Start for half a day, but that was it. He's always been in special ed. And then all my other students have also always been in special ed. I don't think any of them have ever had experience outside of it. Except for obviously when they're home, they do get to go out and stuff. But a lot of them do have severe behaviors as far as they scream, hit, they get overwhelmed easily, they laugh hysterically for no reason. It could be anything. So I think that's the biggest reason why they're not with general ed.
And I know that you do have some classes, like your class that you have is in a separate almost school itself. And then you have some classes that are in special ed fars that are actually in the public school that
Yes.
you do have individuals that are actually a little higher functioning autistic that are actually able to participate at a certain level. And but then you have a lot of the individuals and kids that do have disability. There's a lot of parents that don't really know how to deal with it. Because a lot of times when they do bring their child into school, and usually elementary school, things are fine, and then eventually things get developed later on to the point there might be something wrong, whether it's, maybe it's the child's vision, maybe it's the child can't actually hear in class, or maybe it's their attention. Maybe you might need to deal with, he might be a little too hyper, or she might be a little too hyper. There's a lot of different stages that it seems like the parents and the child go through with the education system and the teachers to try to figure out what's actually going on.
Right.
Being in special ed, can you sort of address some of those things that some of the parents that right now might be having to face those things of trying to find out what's going on with my child?
So some of the the majority of what I see is the behaviors. So a lot of parents, they don't know what to do. They don't know if they need to put their kid on medication. A lot of people are completely against doing that because you don't want to put these chemicals into your child. But at the same time, when they're screaming and hollering and interfering with everyone else's education, it's kind of you have to find the balance somewhere. So I think that's the biggest issue with my students. But I'll tell you from a mom's perspective, my son, like I said, he's severely autistic, and he originally, when he started school, I was dead set on him going to public school, just because I didn't want to put him in state school, because in state school, they're not, they don't get to be around other kids that can talk, or other kids that are, I guess, I don't want to say normal, but I mean just more, I guess, what society sees as normal. And it's not because I want him to be normal, but I want him to be able to function on his own one day. And so I thought, well, if I send him to regular school, then he'll see these kids that can talk, and these kids that associate with each other, and that play with each other, and that he'll learn these things. And I tried it for a few months, well, I probably about a half a year, and it just wasn't working. I mean, he would go and he would cry and scream. He would cry so much that he would throw up, and it was just, it just wasn't where he needed to be. So I was like, this isn't working. And as a parent, it's kind of like, you don't know what to do. Like, what do you do at this point? Do you send them to state school where there's a very low chance that they're going to come out and eventually be able to go to regular school? Or do you, I mean, what do you do? So I did decide to send him to state school, and he's doing wonderful.
That's great. That's wonderful. It just, I know that a lot of the parents, when they go through these things and deal with the teachers, there's not a lot of resources out there. There's not a lot of information for parents to identify and understand what they can do for their child, whether their child has Asperger's, whether their child actually is dyslexic, whether their child has partial autism or other ailments or mental issues. It seems like in the state of Missouri, it's hard to find those resources. And most of the parents, let's face it, most parents automatically, I mean, they live day to day on their paycheck. They go to work and they come home. They pretty much want to raise up their family, and the last thing they want to think about is there's a problem with their child. And then if there is, it's almost like having to stop and really look at things and try to educate themselves. And a lot of times, you don't have the resources to educate yourself.
Yeah, a lot of it's going on Google and looking up, just doing research, as much research as you can, just to figure out what you need to do. I know, like, I started the whole teaching thing before my son was even diagnosed. And actually, matter of fact, before I was even pregnant with him, I started working at the state school as an aide. And I loved it. But plus, my cousin has Down syndrome, so they've always had a special place in my heart. But it's still hard. I mean, and every person that you meet with a disability, it doesn't matter what it is, they're different. So I can learn all these things about my son and meet someone else with autism, and it's going to be completely different.
I remember one time I was in 7th grade, and I was in the special ed class for a while there, because I would be part-time there and part-time mainstream. And I got to start to get to know a lot of the different students, I mean, as far as all the individuals with their own disability. And I started to question them. I said, it seems like the teachers aren't really teaching you anything that you don't really know, that you're actually not being challenged. And you might want to ask them, hey, can I actually learn something I want to learn? And that went over like a lead bullet because it was pretty much to the point that the teacher was overwhelmed once the students actually asked to be taught something that they wanted to learn. And the teacher ended up almost having a nervous breakdown, so the students had a nervous breakdown, and they were throwing chairs and everything like that around, and I was sitting there just watching everything. And then I remember what happened is the principal came in and then ended up bringing me out of the class and bringing to me his office, and he knew that I wasn't doing anything, but he knew I was pretty much might have started the whole thing. And he was asking me what was going on, what happened. I said, I don't know. I guess they were actually asking to learn something. Yeah. And he wasn't very happy with me, but there's not much he was able to do. But what I learned from that is it doesn't matter if you're in a very rich school district, if you're in a very poor school district, what it comes down to, and just like anything in the health field, in education, or anything in the state health field, mental or physical health field, there's really not a lot of knowledge or information. It's as you had said, parents have to do their own research, identify what traits their child actually has going on, and find out what resources are out there. A lot of people don't realize that the school has to help provide those avenues if you identify that. Am I correct?
Yes. Yes, you can call up you have to request an IEP meeting, and then you'll have that meeting, and then you'll have them put it into the IEP. That way it's a because the IEP is a contract. It's an individual education plan or program. And so you have to follow that IEP. That's why the parents are supposed to be a part of that IEP. And a lot of parents don't know that. A lot of parents are like, oh, I'm just gonna let the teacher do it because that's their job. But they don't realize that they are a part of that team. And a lot of teachers are bad about not letting them know.
Well, I think, I mean, being a teacher myself in college, I found, and actually educating a lot of students that are actually now school teachers, I find that what happens is that there's only so much information that a teacher learns, especially teaching in public schools. And there's only a certain amount of classes you actually take and are required to take. And when anything's outside your scope of knowledge or comfort zone, then those teachers try to isolate things, so they try to get as little information out to the parents or the child as possible.
Yeah.
Because
that
their
is
own
very
their
true.
own insecurities.
Yes.
Because they don't want to. They already. I understand a lot of teachers have their own schedule and their own load of work that they have to do, and anything to pile up on that is just, it's even harder.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it does make it harder. But a lot of one thing I like, because I went to SEMO, and one thing I like about SEMO is the main thing we learned is that our kids come first. Our students come first. What they need is what matters, because what we need, we're there to teach them. We're not there to teach us.
Yeah.
So we're there to help them become better. So we need to listen to what what other teachers say. We don't necessarily have to do what they say, but if we get some advice from, say, a veteran teacher, like I'm a first year teacher, so if I get advice from a veteran teacher, I'm going to take that. I'm like, okay, I can make this work. And the same thing with their parents, with the students' parents. I'm going to listen to what they say they do at home, it works for them, and then I'm going to try to implement that into my classroom so that we can do what's best for the student.
And you do have some of the smaller school districts that don't really want to deal with some of those issues, and they'll try to explain to the parents that they need to go somewhere else or try to farm it off or kick it down the road. But problem is, and a lot of parents don't realize is that as long as they're getting public funds, that school district has to help provide that child's needs.
Yes, they do.
It's under the Disabilities Act.
IDEA.
And it's a hard one because, I mean, a lot of times parents are strong-armed, again, without having that full knowledge and full information, what they can actually provide for their child.
And what makes it worse, at least what I've seen, is in college you're taught, that, like I said, that the parents are a part of the IEP team. But then I have noticed that once you get into that school district, even when I did my student teaching, I noticed that a lot of the times the administration would take the teacher's side instead of the parent side. And I get that you don't want any conflict, but at the same time, you're there to find the middle, to find that balance, instead of saying, oh, that parent is a trouble, or that parent just causes issues. They're not causing issues. They want what's best for their kid. And that's what I feel like the administration is there for, at least the LEA, the person that leads the meetings, is there to help find that balance. So that way the parents are being heard, the student, if they can talk, are being heard, or, if they can communicate in some way, are being heard, and the teacher's also being heard. That way there's a balance, and that just helps the student in the end.
And I know sometimes it's hard for the student going through that whole process because one, they're getting attention, which is great, but at the same time, they might be getting the wrong attention, so they're actually feel like they're playing that game of, well, what do I do, or how do I play this? Just so that they can keep getting the attention, but not knowing what's going on.
Right, yes.
I remember when I was going through the whole testing and everything, I kept on explaining to individuals that was going through, and that was putting me through testing, is basically, let's play a game of chess. And they just couldn't get it. And I said, well, if you really want to understand what's going on, I can play a game of chess so you can actually figure out that it's not about the mental, it's not about the physical, it's about other things. And what I found down the line, I went to high school, and the high school was like a little miniature college. Again, one of the top 10 public schools in Illinois, and the high schools was basically, you had 1,000 graduating students, so you had about altogether 6,000 students in high school. And I've always been excelled in art, and even that was the other form of how I communicated to others. And I always excelled at it. And then I went to high school, they had 10 art teachers. And I was able to excel in that, and I got high honors and everything like that. But the odd thing was, in my regular classes, they put me in a classroom with drug rehab students. And I wasn't on drugs, but that's how the system was. And so the teacher at the time would actually give you the students the homework and the work for the semester, and then they would actually give them the answers. You'd basically grade yourself. So most of the students were actually pretty much cheating, and they were actually just, because they were drug rehab students, they were pretty much sleeping throughout the whole class time and everything like that, and it was always interesting. So it was a different realm that I was actually dealing with. But I was always focused on all my outside classes, the art, and all the other programs, so I was focused on that. When I did go on to my senior year, I ended up, my goal was actually go into college, get a scholarship, but the hard thing was most colleges, and get to a scholarship, you have to go through ACT and SAT test, and I was able to have the extended time and everything, but it was, if you can flunk it, I probably would have flunked it. But the other odd thing is that I had also had a goal of being the student speaker. And so I ended up becoming the student speaker. I ended up achieving a bunch of awards at the high school, along with the scholarship and everything, and being the student of the year, and then also the student of the year for disabilities. But odd thing was, I still was on my own, and I still felt alone in the sense of not being able to achieve and get the full information I wanted. When I did go on to Art Institute in Kansas City, and I got a scholarship there. And the hard thing is when I got there, it wasn't the inability to actually do the art, because I was very much a visual person. I was able to actually interact with people visually. It was basically dealing with the literal side of it. And so they had pretty much trying to figure out how to educate me, not on the visual, but actually on the literal side. So they actually hired tutors and other individuals to actually help me out. And I went through things. I had a lot of rough chores, even having a conversation with our philosophy teachers of basically arguments about the difference of visual language comparison to a written language, that the visual language, my viewpoint, has more of a non-barriers, and the written language is a lot more, has more structure and more barriers. I eventually went on to grad school. Unfortunately, when I went to grad school at the University of Arizona, and when I went there, they had resources for individuals with disabilities, but if you're dyslexic, you actually had to pay for them. And so I had actually gone through the process, and I ended up filing a federal lawsuit against them. And what had happened is it went to the Supreme Court and actually changed the law throughout the states that universities could not charge individuals that are dyslexic a fee. So if you were physically handicapped and you needed their services, it was free. So it changed the law back in the mid-90s by the Supreme Court. But from that, I've always found working throughout while going to college and throughout afterwards and working with the arts, I've always worked with a lot of the individuals with special needs, and finding out ways to actually provide them with their rights, show them that parents and along with kids that there's actually options out there. And as you're talking about, Missouri's not very good about having the resources at a lot of levels. And that I've done a lot of projects, even here in Cape at the university. I did a lot of projects working with individuals with disabilities and artists, and developing a community-based art program. And I've done that overseas in Asia, along with Australia and the Middle East, by working with artists and individuals with disabilities. And one of the best analogies I found is, and as you were talking about lights, autistic individuals, I mean, it's not only light, sometimes it's patterns, like your shaw, and if it's something that's very vibrant, some individuals that are autistic can actually have a mental breakdown just because of that. In Singapore, I had a individual that was autistic. She was actually gifted in the sense that she can actually play anything you want on the piano. And we had this big performance in a theater that we were putting together. We had adult kids that were actually paraplegic, bipolar, individuals that were autistic, deaf, blind, along with some artists that were, and educators that were. We were all working together, and so we had this individual that was autistic, and she was actually playing the piano like there was no tomorrow. I had actually showed a video to all the kids, and some of the parents were there. I showed Frankenstein. And in Asia, a lot of the old movies, the American movies and that people don't really know about them like we do here.
Right.
So when I showed Frankenstein, asked the kids and also some of the teachers and some of the artists what they thought of it. And they said, well, point blank, the person's a monster, has no soul and everything. I said, really? And I said, why is that? And then all of a sudden, one of the parent of the child that can play the piano like anything, that's autistic, had said, well, he has no soul and he's just a big monster. And I said, well, you know, in some ways, a lot of people look at individuals with disabilities that way. And he wasn't very happy. And I said, well, you just gotta take a step back and realize how people perceive things, whether it's visual, whether it's mental, whether it's just something that is emotional, or even if it's something that someone walks in a room and you just get a bad feeling about that person. We have these biases, and you just got to break down those biases in order to be able to communicate to one another. And I think that's the biggest thing is with kids with disabilities is being able to understand the needs of those kids. And being in special education as you are, I'm sure that you're having to deal with that with a lot, with the parents, with the child, with also the communities, and also with even other teachers.
Yeah, I mean, not some, our teachers, we all know, I mean, all of us, there's only 5 of us in the whole school. And there's only like 30, I think there's like 35 kids in the whole school. So all the teachers know, but I think the biggest thing is, I would say, between a teacher and a parent would probably be the parents, just because we think we're doing what's best for the students. We try to do what's best for the students, and sometimes a parent, like if we send a note home or if we talk to them on the phone, they may perceive what we say, which I've had this issue a few times already. They perceive what we say completely different than what we meant to say. So for instance, we had parent-teacher conferences in March, and I was talking to a grandparent who had custody of her grandkids, and I had said that we were talking about her son, and she had said that she felt like she was holding him back by him being in state school. And I said that I understood where she was coming from because I felt the same way about my son. And then she went to my boss and told my boss that she felt like I was telling her that her son shouldn't be there, that he shouldn't be at the school, that we didn't want him at the school. And I was like, that's not even close to what I said, because I love her son. Her son is very smart, and there's no trouble with him at all. I mean, he has a little bit of an attitude, but he's also a teenager. But he doesn't talk a whole lot, but we communicate, and I love him. But she perceived it as me saying that he doesn't need to be there. And I was like, that is not what I meant. That's not what I meant at all. And she's not the only teacher. There was another parent. There was another one of my students' parents that said that what I said to her, she didn't take right or something, and told my boss this. And my boss was like, well, and I told him exactly what I said, and just that, that the student was upset, and that the bus won't take them on them if they're upset and screaming and kicking and stuff. And I don't know what else I said. I didn't say anything mean. I just said what was happening. And it was weird. And then my boss basically tells me to basically sugarcoat everything. And I'm like, what do you want me to say? Oh, they're being really good. They're kicking, but I don't know what to say at that. I even bring up my son all the time. I'm like, I understand my son. I've had to pick my son up before because he's screaming and crying so much that he's throwing up. I mean, I don't, it's hard as a teacher to know how to talk to a parent about their child with disabilities, because they may take it a different way than what you meant for them to take it.
And sometimes I've seen where parents actually, as you're bringing up, sort of overcompensate for certain things. And they're more hype and sensitized into wanting to listen at a certain level. Yeah. And so it's almost like they have their hearing almost tuned out at certain times. I think they have, once they hear a certain thing, and I know this one student, the one I was just talking about, he had gotten a lot of calls from his last teacher. Like, they were calling the parents all the time. And I was like, I get that I think they're so used to being called that she just assumed that I was calling in the same way as the old teacher did. I don't know. That's what I'm guessing, because, like, I didn't say anything. I said exactly what happened, and I told her,
you know, the buses are contracted out now with First Student. They have the choice to not accept the child on the bus. And I let her know that, and I was like, I just said exactly just the facts, which is what I was taught to do in school, was say the facts. And that's what I did. And it wasn't rude. I was just calm, and the nurse was even right there when I was talking to her, and she's like, you didn't say anything wrong. I mean, but it's hard to know how, even from a parent's perspective, sometimes when a teacher says something to me, I think like, well, what do they mean by this? You know, like, okay, it's hard to understand, even when they say in a note, I get it because you're reading a text, and that's always hard to perceive. But then when you're on the phone, I try to use a light tone, but it's sometimes you just don't know how to react, especially with the more severe disabilities. And even some of the other ones, I know there was, when I did some of my student teaching, because we do blocks, we do 3 blocks, and then we do student teaching. And I know a lot of the students that we had within that time, their parents, some of them were pretty easygoing, and they told what they wanted their child to work on, and it all went well. But other ones, it was kind of like they wanted the teacher to do everything.
Yeah.
Like she was only in special ed for an hour, which was just for resource, which is like helping with homework, things like that. And her mom was like, well, are y'all going to teach her how to cook? It's like, well, I mean, that's not what she's in here for. She's in here because she has a disability in math. You know, so it's hard between teachers and parents to kind of sometimes to find that balance, to know, because the parents are trying to do what they think is best for their student, but the teacher is also trying to do what they think is the best for the student, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, it's never easy on either side. I mean, I know that, again, the perceptions that people have, there's a lot that goes through. I mean, in kids with disabilities, I mean, they have to go through so many obstacles, and a lot of times they're on their own. Even socially, emotionally, the only ones that they actually have are their folks or their family, if that, at times. And to actually focus and overcome that, along with the support of the teachers and everything,
Right.
there's only so much you can do. And but they just keep on going. But I know that in the state of Missouri, it's hard, especially at the level that you're talking about. Individuals that are actually mentally and autistically disabled, on the extreme side, it's hard because there's not a lot of clear paths that are actually out there.
Yeah, it is. It's.
I know the hard thing is sometimes parents that actually have some children that, even with disabilities that are actually physical disabilities, and that sometimes they don't have the funds, and they don't have the health insurance and that. Sometimes they have to ward the child over to the state in order to deal with the health insurance of some things.
Yes, my matter of fact, my aunt, the one that has a child with Down syndrome, even though she had Down syndrome and she was very severe, her age equivalent is 5-year-old, and she's only 2 years younger than me. I think she was 27, and for a long time, until she was 18, the government wouldn't provide insurance for her, so she was paying all out of pocket, just trying to. I mean, she had insurance on her, but it was an extra $500 a month just for her, and for her to be able to get the services she needs, which isn't much around here. But you do. I mean, there are some things. I know, like St. Francis, they have a free speech. They do speech for free for, I think it's like 30 minutes or something like that. But other things that you need, like with my son's autism, it was when he was 2, I wanted to put him in. I wanted to get him ABA services after I had seen the place and everything, and they told me it was going to be $500 every 2 weeks, and I was like, I can't. And our insurance wouldn't cover it. So I was like, oh well, we can't afford to do that. So we just did what we could. The only thing that they offered was went to early childhood special ed for half a day, and then for 2 years, and then he got home base from Scott City, and then he also got home base from Dayoc, which was all free, but still it's only an hour. Those are only an hour a week or a month for one of them. So it's still, and then we got First Steps, which is very helpful. But they only do it from birth to 3, so he only got it for a year because he wasn't diagnosed until he was
Until later.
almost 2. Yeah.
And it's just hard because you don't have the resources. I know that in the bigger cities, there's a little bit more avenues from the resources and nonprofit organizations that actually help out. I know, like in Arizona, there's a friend of mine that started a program called First Street Kids, and she ended up winning the governor's award 5 times. What she does is it's also called Arts for All, and what she does is she'll actually take kids that are disabled, non-disabled, and she'll even have a day camp for them, and also a day program for them, and she'll actually have tenants there. She'll get funds to actually help provide for the services and everything for free, physical therapy, along with education, along with dealing with the arts, from doing plays to doing concerts, just bringing the arts to the kids. That was her goal. And she was able to raise up money enough and federal funds and grants to actually have these services provided for the kids. And I know that resources like that in smaller rural areas like here, they're not there.
We have one that I actually just found out was free, which it's not that I mind to pay. It's just like that $500 every 2 weeks. I mean, that's $1,000 a month
Yeah.
for therapy. And I'm like, who can afford that?
On a teacher's salary?
Yeah, well, my husband's a truck driver, so I mean that helps now. But back then it
But
was just
still,
him working,
I mean,
and I was going to
most
school.
average person.
Yeah, it's just that's a lot of money. And then, but Kenny Rogers though in Sykeston, they do it's free there, which we did apply. So hopefully this summer he'll start there. But it's still a matter of getting him there, because I mean I work in Sykeston, he goes to school in Cape, so then I'll have to leave work, hurry up and get to Cape, and hurry up and get there, and hope they're still open. So, I mean, it's a struggle. I mean, and for parents to even know what to do in that kind of, like, do I take off work just to go get him and take him? I mean, it's hard to know what to do.
And again, going back to the child, I mean, from my own experiences, that I still have struggle with the situation, is that I know that most adult autistic individuals, or even individuals that have other disabilities, people in the public, it's hard for them to interact with them. And Asperger's, people don't know how to deal with someone that has Asperger's. They're just so focused, and they just know how to deal with their humor, their attitudes, their insincerity, and but myself, I mean, because I'm a very visual person, and I have a tendency of basically thinking ahead of the game, and I have a tendency of my art. I've learned that I've been around the world doing art projects and dealing with my art, and I can communicate a lot of people around the world with my art, but a lot of people I know don't know how to deal with it, because it's a language. And it's almost like dealing with an individual that's autistic. People don't know how to deal with an individual that's autistic, because they have a certain language, and you got to pick up on that language and the nuances, and how to interact with those nuances.
Right. And a lot of the times I don't think people even, sometimes it seems like they're being rude but a lot of times it's just because they have never been exposed to it.
Exactly.
So if they haven't been exposed to it and they see it, they think it's weird, or when they do find out, they're like, oh, I'm so sorry. But they don't realize that can be.
Well, and then you have the opposite side, like on my side, is that because you don't see it visually, it's more mentally. It basically, people are sort of offended by it because they don't understand how to react with it or interact with it.
Yes.
At times, and it's not easy. I know that individuals that are physically handicapped. Sometimes it's easy for them to actually get socially accepted, but at the same time, they still have their own struggles because people will look down upon them that they have the inability. When I was in Singapore and other countries, individuals that are deaf or blind, a lot of times in Asia especially, they're locked up. They're looked down upon in the family as basically a curse. And so they'll actually sort of hide those individuals with disabilities.
Yes.
And in Eastern Europe, it's very similar. An individual that's deaf is not allowed to drive
Wow.
because they think that they don't have the ability to drive, that their hearing affects how they can deal with the road. But you have different countries have different rules, different countries have different cultural issues, and we in Southeast Missouri also have our own cultural differences with individuals that are with disabilities too. And we just don't know how to deal with those too. But it goes back to what we were talking about just with the parents. If a child is finding themselves in a situation that they're having difficulties in school or in a social setting, that it might be time to actually look at what's going on and what resources are out there.
Yes.
And just don't be afraid to ask.
Yes, I have actually noticed a big difference, even in the last couple of years, as far as, I mean, there's just not very many resources around here. But I have noticed we now, like, when I first started in state schools as an aide years ago, there wasn't anyone to help with resources. But now they actually have a social worker that she comes to 3 different schools. So, like she said, our school twice a week, the other school twice a week, and then another school once a week. It depends on how big the school is and how many people she has to call. But I mean, they're actually, at least they're trying to do something now, trying to get, like, just every week just about she comes and she'll send home something different to, like, something that the parents can look into. But one thing that I do notice is that they don't have very much for people that don't get Medicaid or don't get assistance. Like, we don't get assistance, so nothing that they send out is going to help us at all. There's nothing that's like, oh, well, at least to get a discount or something on therapy. I mean, I would accept that. But there's nothing, we don't get anything like that because most of it's, you have to be qualified for SSI or Medicaid. It's like, we don't get that. Like, my son can't even he could get lunch at school, but it's like $5 a plate. So I'm paying, and I already pay for my other kids to get lunch, so I just send his lunch because he's not going to eat what they have anyway. But still, the fact that these disabled children are having to pay more for their food whenever they're the ones that really need more help, in my opinion, than a
Which is true.
neurotypical person. Yeah.
And it's, I know a lot of parents that actually have kids that are just disabled, that with their limited resources, and not being able to have those avenues, it's hard because how do you actually provide for your child? And you're wanting the best for your child to make sure that your child actually is able to exceed the fullest potential. And you can see that the avenues and the resources are actually there, but you're not able to utilize them.
And one of the things I've noticed just throughout my blocks is that a lot of these kids that have, like, intellectual disability, for instance, a lot of their parents have it too. And one of the things that I find, it's harder for them than it is for me, because I'm able to do the research that I need to do to help my son progress. It's still hard. I mean, it's still difficult, and I'm stressed all the time because it's hard to know what he wants, what he needs, especially if he's sick or something like that. But with them, it's harder on them because they don't have, maybe their IQ is like 55 or something. It's just harder for them to be able to understand that if they go to somebody and ask for help, or if they go to Google and do some research, which is what I've been doing for years, is just research, more and more research, finding multiple things that say the same thing so that I know that there's a higher chance of it being accurate, you know, or knowing which websites are true and which ones aren't. Whereas they don't know how to do that. They don't understand how to do that. Even if you tell them, I could tell them, like, hey, you can look at here, and they won't do it because they're the same as their child is. I mean,
And well, you also, and nothing against the situation, but you have a percentage of parents that might be addicted to drugs or alcohol.
yeah.
You have a percentage of parents that might be abusive too. So there's a lot of factors that are actually there, especially in Southeast Missouri. And a lot of, as we talked about over the years, is that you have parents that go from one town to another town, so they're going to different school districts, and it's sort of bringing their child into that whole environment, each different school district, or they're homeschooling their child because they don't know how to gain the resources, as you're talking about. So it just perpetuates the thing even further.
And a lot of times I feel like these specific adults that were in, like, there's so many that were, like, there was a student in one of my blocks that couldn't read. He was in 10th grade and could not read anything, even like something simple as is. But his dad was the same exact way. But they were very smart when it came to tractors and farming and all that stuff. And that was his idea, was that that's what he was going to do. And I tried to explain to him that I understand that, but what if new farming equipment comes out? How are you going to know how to use it? If, you know, I didn't say anything, but, you know, if that happens to his dad or something, he can't help him figure it out, then how is he going to know how to use it if he can't read? Because I was just trying to help him want to do it.
Yeah.
But he thought, well, my dad can't read, and he's doing just fine, so I can do that also. But I think if there's more farming equipment, new farming equipment, how are you going to read that manual to know how to use it? You know, and he got it, but at the same time, he's like, oh, I'll be all right, you know. And it's just, it's hard to even, for them to understand that just because their parents are this way and they did just fine, they don't realize how much is progressing right now, how many things are changing in technology, and I mean, things are going to get harder and harder and it's happening so fast.
It is, and I know that there's a lot of different issues, especially if you have a child that's disabled. I mean, individuals that are actually blind or deaf. I've worked with a lot of the state schools, and there's a subculture within the blind. There's subculture in the deaf, and a lot of parents don't realize what that subculture is about, and especially being in a rural area like here, it's just something foreign, and it's a totally different culture. But at the same time, if you have a child that has the disability, you, as a parent, you probably need to just take a step back again and just listen and, as you're talking about, educate yourself about what that disability, what that effect is for your child and also for your family. Because if you have siblings or other kids in your family, it's also going to affect them in the long run too. But you need to make sure it affects them in a positive way, not in a negative way. And I know that over the years, and a lot of people have seen it, you've probably seen it within the families, that a lot of times kids can also be bullied and abused within their own family and treated very badly because of what they have.
Yes. And not even just being bullied, there's like the opposite also, whereas a lot of the times I find that certain people treat my son better than they do my girls. And then my girls notice it. And I'm like, I explain to them, like, I get that you're trying to be extra nice to him, but you being extra nice to him isn't helping them.
It's going to help them.
It's just going to cause them not to like him.
And you do have the opposite side, as you're saying, families that are actually able to compensate for the child that has a disability to the point that it creates a crutch to the point that the parent has to be there all the time for the child.
It does. It really does. And and even as a parent, it's hard to not do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's hard I have to tell myself, I feel like if I wasn't as educated as I am as far as special ed goes, I would probably be very similar to other parents, you know, wanting to give excuses for what he does. And often I find myself thinking, should he be in trouble right now for what he just did because he's autistic? And then I'm like, well, you know, my other kids, if they were to bite me, they would be in trouble.
So here's another question though, especially in the state-run organization like you have, are you finding that there are kids that are coming to you guys that are somewhat, they're slow because of their folks being involved with addicted to drugs?
I don't know any, like I can't say for sure, but I know that there are some that are no longer with their parents because they were on drugs while they're pregnant with them.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why they are the way they are. There was not where I'm at now, but there was at the other school, the one in Cape, because I worked there as an aide for a little while. There was a boy there that only had like half of his brain, and it was due to his parents being on drugs. So I guess I believe she was pregnant and she was drinking and doing drugs. So a lot of that causes a lot of the disabilities. I mean, causes body parts not to grow, organs not to function properly. And that's mostly our wheelchair kiddos, and sometimes it's ones that can walk, but when you lose half of your brain, you just don't function right.
And the problem is especially with meth and other things like that, is if the child's born with it in the mother, is that they're addicted themselves.
The fetal.
Aside from the disability that they might have, unfortunately.
Yes. And sometimes a lot of times, so I actually have one right now, a student, she's only there, I didn't even think about this until you said that, but she was in a very, very bad situation. She's the one, actually, the sister of the boy I was talking about earlier, the one that the grandma has custody of him. Her and him both actually, but it was mostly her that got all the punishments. Their parents were on drugs, but they were also, I don't know exactly what their diagnosis was, but they were also disabled. They had some, I don't really know what they had, but they were just kind of on somewhere. I don't know, possibly autistic, I'm not sure. And they would put her in a cage, a dog cage. They would lock her in there for hours. They hurt her. They messed her leg up real bad. She has to, I mean, it's really bad from her being in that cage for so long. It's affected, like even now, she's like 13 now, and this was years ago when she was like a toddler. And that now her behaviors are so bad. She has PTSD, which is
Hard to deal
it's
with.
rough because she's very aggressive. And the other day she hit me in the head because she wanted to go home. I mean, she didn't want to be there. And sometimes you don't even know what caused it. It's just, all of a sudden she just gets mad, and we don't know why sometimes. I mean, we think that, because, with PTSD, it could be anything. I mean, her grandma said one day she coughed, as in the grandma coughed, and then all of a sudden she just started getting mad, started throwing stuff and trying to hit, and it just got bad. And a lot of times in the classroom, she'll be sitting there just fine, and then all of a sudden she's throwing stuff off the shelves and trying to attack us, and it's hard. And I think a lot of that was due to, I'm assuming her parents were doing drugs while they were pregnant too, but I know that they were after she was born. And like I said, the only thing I know for sure happened is they locked her in a cage, in a kennel, and they beat her and stuff.
That's hard.
Yeah.
And I know that a lot of times, as far as the kids with disabilities, in those situations, especially in broken homes like that, they get the brunt of things, and it's not their fault.
Yeah.
What are some things that you see within your experience in special ed and being a parent that you can wish that would change?
Things that would change.
To help things out.
I think like just having more resources would be the most beneficial, but also people's I think that more people should be educated in disabilities, like whether it be in schools, actually. In school, starting early on, I think that they should be at least have an introduction of of just different disabilities.
Because let's face it, an individual that, especially a physical disability or a somewhat high-functioning autistic child that's in a public school, they're automatically targeted within that school by
They
all the
are.
other kids, because most of the kids don't know anything about that child. Teachers are usually more or less, well, he's different or she's different, and just be okay with that. And all the kids are just more or less, Renoir used to say that the most beautiful element, if you actually look at a fruit stand and you see the apples, the first thing that you notice is not the shiny apples, it's the bruised apple.
Apple, yeah.
And the kids are very much like that. They'll focus on that, but they don't see the beauty behind it. They just see it as a bruised apple, and they want to bruise it more.
And they'll take advantage also. They'll take full advantage of their, I guess, their knowledge. There was a boy that went to Bell City, and when I went there, and these kids were telling him to ask another boy out, and he had no idea what was going on. He was just, I don't know if he was autistic, I can't remember, but they were telling him to ask this other boy out, so he did, because he had no idea what he was doing, and I was upset. I mean, I was mad about it, and I went over there, and I said, "What are y'all doing?" I said, "This is ridiculous." And I mean, I yelled at them. I still remember I was in 8th grade, and I yelled at them because it was ridiculous. And then from then on, I had this kid, until he left, I had him sit with me every day at breakfast and lunch, because I didn't want them doing something like that again.
And I think that's a key element. One, education, as far as in the schools for disabilities. The other one is, as you had said, for parents to actually learn as much information as possible, as far as if you have a child that has disability.
Yes.
I'd like to thank you for your time, and appreciate being here.
Thank-
Yep.
I did have a question I was going to ask you. I know a lot of times the parent expects so much from the teacher. And I bet a lot of times they probably get upset because they expect you to be teaching them more than what they can learn.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I was curious too, because I don't really know what goes on in those rooms, you know, when you're teaching them. What do you teach them exactly? Like you said, that one woman wanted.
It really it depends on the student, but we do goals every day because with our kids, they regress, so they'll forget what they learn, and then they won't be able to do it again. So we do it every single day, so that repetition helps them remember. But they all have different goals. They're all individual, and then there's 2 aides in my classroom, and then me, and we take turns and we rotate to work with each student. And then other times we do basic art activities. So just maybe putting stickers on something, or something easy, because my students are very low functioning, and some of the other classes, they're low functioning, but they're not as low as my class. My class, they're like 5-year-olds or younger. But we do that, and then we do these things called adaptive books. So I have these books that I print off and I laminate them, and then there's Velcro so that they can follow along. So I'll read it to them, and then they put the picture that matches onto that. That way they're learning to match, but they're also listening to a story at the same time. Things like that. Simple things.
That about time? Thank you very much.
Thank you.